Good morning and good afternoon to everybody on this call. It's a great pleasure to have you with us during the next hour or so for the webinar on Rise and Shine, how family businesses or enterprising families are weathering the storm. It's evidently quite peculiar times that we're in right now, and in times where we're all kind of struggling and trying to find a good balance between personal life and professional life, trying to find a balance and homeschool our children, and at the same time jump on webinars like this one or professional business meetings, and trying to find that balance. I think we start to have an acute appreciation for the complexity of trying to combine family and business. And when we put ourselves into the shoes of family businesses or of enterprising families, this balance and striking that balance is something that they have to do on a daily basis. And those of you who are from a business owning family will have an acute appreciation for that complexity, and the others hopefully after this webinar will too. So my name is Peter Vogel. I'm Professor of Family Business and Entrepreneurship here at IMD. I'm the Director of the Family Business Center, and I also hold the chair, the Devio Farm Chair for Family Philanthropy. So looking at the philanthropic activities of enterprising families as part of their holistic activities within the family enterprise system. With me in the call, I also have Lise Muller and Matthew Crudgington, my colleagues from the Family Business Center. They will quickly introduce themselves as well. Lise.
Hi everyone, it's great to have you on board and see you here. Enjoy the webinar and make the most of it. Send us plenty of questions. We are ready.
Hi, hi everybody. Lovely to see you. Thank you for coming to join us today. We look forward to your questions and hopefully to seeing you in the future.
Thanks a lot. So let's get started. I'll put up the slides now so you see the protagonists. I'll be the main speaker, but with me again, Lise and Matthew. They will support me to also address any questions that you might have throughout the webinar. Quickly, what are we going to cover in this webinar, and what are we doing over the next 55 minutes until noon Swiss time? We will go into some of the core principles of long-term success and what has brought multi-generational family businesses up until this point. So what are some of those parameters? I'll then pick up a few of the questions that you're asking in the Q&A feature. Then we'll go into kind of more of an outlook. So kind of what brought you here might not take you there. So kind of that logic. So thinking ahead into the future and contextualizing it very specifically with the current COVID-19 crisis, which is evidently something that in that form or shape we haven't really witnessed yet in our lives. So there are two parts where I'm going to address questions. So for questions, please use the Q&A function, which you will find in the menu. There's also a chat feature, which you now started using already to introduce yourselves. So I think you're very well versed with the tool. Questions in the Q&A function. Lise and Matthew will be also answering questions in real time. If you like any question in particular, please give it a like. So that question will surface to the top. So when I'm going to address questions, I'm going to choose the ones that are kind of flagged at the very top of the list. So before we get into the content, I just want to set the stage, what we see as a family business. So what is a family business? Everything starts with a definition. In the most simple way, a family business is a business that is dominantly controlled, that can be either leadership and or ownership by a family. That is quite simple in its definition. Now, in the work we do in the Family Business Center, which is, by the way, one of the oldest centers in the world, we add an element to that definition. We add an element which is with the intention to sustain that control across generations. So we not only look at our multiple family members controlling a business, which could also be if two siblings or a couple are running a business that they started 10 years ago, that would be part of that first part of the definition. However, we are particularly interested in those multi-generational family businesses because over time, the complexity of the system increases And that is where, let's say, from an academic point of view, but also when we look at the bulk of the work we do from a teaching side or also advisory side, that is where we typically come in. So there are two principles: dominant control in the hands of a family and the transgenerational outlook. Now, very quickly, we want to do a quick poll, which I'll launch in a second, to just understand who's in the room. Are you from a family business? Is the business you work for a family business, and are you part of that family that controls the business, or not? So I'm going to quickly launch a poll. Okay, wonderful. So here you see the results. We have 30% are from a family business and part of the family controlling the business. So about a third. Then we have another 26% that are from a family business and work as executives in that family business, but non-family. Then we have about a third who are not from a family business, and then 15% are in other types of professions. Wonderful. Just to get a little bit of a feeling. So let's say roughly, well, there are 56% are in the family business. That's wonderful. Let's say this webinar is, of course, in some way primed towards family businesses or business owning families. However, there are a lot of lessons that can also be taken away from this for those of you who are not from a family business. So the current crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, as I said, is a quite peculiar crisis, something that in that form we haven't really seen before. And it affects, of course, all firms in some way alike. Some industries are hit harder than others, but it affects all of us. We all have to juggle. We have to kind of work from home and find a balance. So if it's a family business or not. However, what we do see is that this crisis or crisis in general are hitting family businesses or family enterprises in a bit of a different way. And there are multiple levels we need to take into account. And what you see here is one of the core frameworks that we use in our teaching also to look at things in a more holistic way. Where you say a family enterprise is, of course, comprised of individuals that are part of a family, of which some are part of the ownership group that control the business, then the business, including all the management and board members, but then also looking at things in a more global and contextualized societal environmental perspective. So on the individual level, of course, you need to ensure that each individual within the family, and then the employees, of course, are healthy physically and mentally. And when you think about it, and you're the business leader of an organization, if you're suddenly affected by this can have devastating effects on the entire organization. So thinking about individual health and well-being is essential in every business, but in a family business even more so. On the family side, how do you, in times of social distancing, ensure family unity, trusting relationships, that in times where maybe the business is suffering, you as a family don't start suffering as well. So you stay united, you stay connected. And how can you ensure that you continue practicing good family governance in times of social distancing? On the ownership side, of course, families, you need to think about your investment portfolio, your personal wealth. You need to think about, the business and how that might affect you as an owner. Do we need to chip in personally to maybe salvage the company? What does that mean from a dividend point of view? Will we now have to not pay out dividends for a couple of years, which might affect some of the shareholders' personal situation quite intensively? On the business side, those are things that of course affect any type of business, if it's a family business or not. You need to think about how do we keep this business afloat, cash preservation, etc. Do we need to make changes from a governance and decision-making point of view? What is the role of the owners in such a crisis vis-a-vis a non-crisis situation? And then the last stone is kind of about the societal impact and environmental impact of family enterprises. And what should the response be? And we'll get to that a bit later as well. What is the responsibility of an enterprising family in a situation like this, in a crisis moment like this? And are there any differences? Now, what I wanted to quickly map out here is family firms that have survived over a longer period of time. Of course, we know that some of the oldest institutions in the world are family businesses, with some family firms being 1,200, 300 years old. But those are typically smaller hotels and other types of organizations, many based in Japan. But what we're looking at here is actually the largest family businesses in the world. So you see mapped out here the 500 largest family businesses by revenues. And on the x-axis, you see the founding year, when those companies have been started. And of course, the higher up they are, the bigger they are. And I just highlighted the 5 biggest ones here by revenues in there. Now, what is interesting when you look at it, you can say, COVID-19 is a quite special crisis in some way. I agree. However, when you look at the history, humanity has been confronted with a lot of pandemics. And here I just selected a few that have been more prominent in humans' history over the last 300-400 years. Then there have been a number of wars, and again, I just picked 6 or 7 to illustrate the point. Evidently, there have been many more, unfortunately. Nonetheless, there have been a number of quite serious wars that have been crisis situations for industries and humanity as such. There have also been a number of financial crises that we have seen over the past centuries. And lastly, what I added here is the waves of industrial revolution, so the industrialization waves that we've observed over the last centuries. And of course, in some form or shape, all of these things, even though being very different in nature, they've all meant change. They've all meant disruption. They've all meant we need to transform the way we do business, the way we lead companies into the future. And the question is, what are some of the lessons we can learn from these kind of companies here that I highlight, that are kind of in this range, that have been 100, 200 years old, and that have in some way very successfully survived those crisis situations because they are among the 500 biggest family firms in the world. These are all multi-billion-dollar companies. So there is something that they must have done right, evidently. So I want to ask you a very simple question that you can answer, please, in the chat function, and I'll pick up some of the answers. What do you think that the ones that I've circled, these 150-plus-year-old family businesses have done right to not only survive over all those centuries or decades, but actually to thrive in times of crisis? So just add your comments. Adaptation, wonderful. Ben, diversity, yes. Suzanne, reinventing, yes. So reinvent, adapt. These are all very good points. Innovation, Mark, yes, absolutely. Solidarity, governance, transformation, optimism, wonderful. So many good points. Long-termism, values, absolutely, fantastic. It goes even too fast for me to read. Legacy, but in essence, those are all the right points, and you're spot on, and basically you're stealing the show from me now, because I think I'm basically done. You got all the main points already. but let me anyway try to respond to this, because in a nutshell, all the points that you just added very skillfully in the chat function can in some way be fit into these 2 buckets. On the one side, we have resilience. We have family firms that have, not only family firms, but family firms that have been tremendously resilient over centuries. And I use the tardigrade on the right as an illustration of the most resilient animal on planet. And then the second one is adaptation, and you added that as well, innovation, reinventing itself. And I used the illustration of a bear who went from brown bear to ice bear when the climate changes. So animals being able to adapt to the new environment. So these are the 2 main pillars, and I want to quickly go into, evidently, I mean, you have a huge laundry list, and I very much look forward to reading all these comments afterwards. But I wanted to distill it to some key points that we see repeatedly being drivers of success. So long-term thinking, financial prudence, emotional connection of the owners, the values and loyalty, entrepreneurial renewal, oftentimes driven by the next generation coming in and changing something to the business model, for example. And the last one being this more philanthropic and CSR side of things, the responsibility. So I would like to respond and go through these points briefly. First point, long-termism. In a family business, long-term is kind of the main element, right? So a quarter in a family firm is 25 years and not 3 months, like let's say in many listed companies, which is also sometimes why we see family firms that have decided to do an IPO and go to the stock market delist again after a certain period of time, because they, not only because of that, but oftentimes we hear that they get frustrated by kind of the pace and having to report quarterly, etc. We oftentimes see families when they set up their family vision. They don't think about, oh, what's our vision for the next 10 years? We sometimes get requests, can we work on a family vision for the next even century sometimes? The ambition is of the senior generation is, of course, to pass on a healthy organization to the next generation. That is the KPI. The KPI is not so much, what's the bonus payment I can give myself or my executives at the end of the year. It's much more, what is the state of the business in when I'm going to pass it on to my children or my nieces and nephews. What we see as well is that CEOs in family firms have a much longer tenure as compared to non-family firms. So that is also an indicator of long-term thinking. Two other points are institutional knowledge. So of course, these family firms have weathered many storms and many crisis situations. So as a result, of course, they've internalized this in some way, oftentimes, ideally. And they have the right governance mechanisms in place already to weather the storm in a very agile way. And the last point is patient capital, right? If it's your own business, if you're the owner, and from an financial injection perspective, patient capital is quite useful in this time when you don't need to think about shareholders who want to get their money worth in the next couple of months already. The second one that we see is financial prudence. So financial prudence, there are other elements related to finances, but financial prudence is very specific, that we see that families spend more disciplined and more carefully. You could say more risk averse. But we see, for example, they're less indebted on average, which in times of crisis right now, where many companies need to think about taking up capital from the outside financial market, if you're less indebted, of course, you have a bit more bandwidth and flexibility to go through such a crisis. The third point is the emotional connection of the family and the owners to the business. So if for those of you who are not from a family business, put yourself into the shoes of family firms whose family name is on the product or the company name. And then, of course, you want to make sure that whatever you do in the most professional way. And here's just a quote from Akio Toyoda, the chairman and CEO of Toyota, in a Congress hearing in 2010, after there have been some technical issues with the acceleration system of the cars. And then he was invited to speak, and he said, look, I'm the first person who cares about this technical issue, and because if my cars fail, it's as if I fail myself. And this emotional connection is very pronounced in the family business, much more than a non-family business. And I'm sure there are many entrepreneurs amongst you as well. If you start a company, you are emotionally connected to your company in a very natural way. The fourth point, and you mentioned that as well, is deep-rooted values and loyalty. So genuine family values. Any company has a value set. That is not the main issue, but the family values are kind of ingrained in the way the company functions and is operated. Oftentimes being very purpose-driven and thinking about the multi-stakeholder setting in the world. And here you just see a subset of values that we see in many families we work with, the multi-generational families, with trust, stewardship, unity, longevity, but also entrepreneurialism being some of those core values. Loyalty is the other part of it, where we see on the one side employees being more loyal to the family businesses compared to non-family firms. But also family businesses are less likely to lay off people in times of crisis. They will rather try to find other creative solutions because they have a much closer bond to the employees and to their families, to the communities. And also the families, business leading families, they oftentimes have these kind of stewards that have been with them for decades. They have been working sometimes with 2 or 3 generations of family members. So they've been trusted sparring partners, very loyal employees and partners. The 5th point is entrepreneurial renewal and adaptation. So being able to entrepreneurially renew, to see opportunities where others see problems, is one of those gifts that multi-generational family businesses have, oftentimes driven by the next generation. And what you see here is a framework that a colleague of mine, Martha Ritz, and I have put together for a forthcoming publication around entrepreneurialism in a family firm or in a family enterprise system, where of course you can be entrepreneurial from a family side, you can foster entrepreneurialism in the business, but you can also interact with the outside startup ecosystem through direct investments or partnerships. And there are of course a lot of very good examples of family firms, also non-family firms, but of course here we focus on the family firms that have done that and embraced entrepreneurialism. On the one side, there's the Mullier family from France, the founders of Auchan and many other companies, very large, complex family, over 700 family shareholders. Entrepreneurship is, among other values, one of the core values in that family. They live and breathe entrepreneurialism. They encourage family members to seek out new entrepreneurial opportunities. They engage very actively with the startup ecosystem out in the environment. They have a dedicated incubator and investment fund for family entrepreneurial ventures, but also for outside activities. And then the Van Eegen company as an example of having consistently transformed itself. So it has started as a merchant company back in 1662. It's one of the Henokians family businesses, though that's an association of family firms with 200 plus years of lifespan. The Van Eegen 1662 started as a merchant company, wool, tobacco, and other products. And through continuity and innovation being 2 core principles of that family and business, they have repeatedly adapted, they've repeatedly sought out new business opportunities, transformed to a new world. And today in the 15th generation, they focus on functional food and ingredients. So again, kind of every generation coming in and bringing some new entrepreneurial spirit into the family and the business. The last point is family businesses as a force for good. And that can mean multiple things. Of course, that can mean philanthropy, that can mean CSR, that can mean how we run our business, how we adjust our products or services or the business models. And what we see is that family businesses, now in this very specific COVID-19 crisis, we've seen that family businesses have jumped in very quickly. And we see it across the board, of course, that families being very generous on the philanthropic side, with more than 80% of the families we work with being in some form or shape philanthropically active anyway, continuing that philanthropic approach through crisis, so they don't cut down on the philanthropic giving, quite the contrary oftentimes. And so pure philanthropy is one way of contributing in such a crisis situation. And here I just listed a small set of names. Evidently, there's a whole laundry list of names of families and individuals who have given in this situation. The second way of how family businesses are trying to do good and help in this crisis is by adjusting the production. And that, again, has happened very quickly. Now, concretely, in the case of ventilators, masks and gowns, sanitizers, many companies, again, not only family firms, also non-family firms, but we're highlighting some of the family firms here, and we've seen them jump in very quickly, which of course has been enabled by, if you have a very direct ownership and control structure in the organization, you can jump in very quickly. You have quick, agile decision making on the family side, on the ownership side, oftentimes on the board of directors as well. So the speed at which you can respond to a crisis is much greater than in other companies. The other way is, of course, by helping customers and employees, by either pushing out requests for rents, like Ayala has done, waiving the rents for clients in malls, or giving reliefs on credits, or also helping out employees by continuing paying salaries. So this responsibility dimension of families in times of crisis is very pronounced. Now, very quickly, I will stop sharing the screen here now and go to the Q&A. I'll pick up one or two of the questions that we see. I see you started voting up questions already. So Antonio's question is number one here, so I'll answer that, hopefully. How will the manufacturing paradigm change after this crisis to prevent extreme dependence on Chinese products? How are family businesses dealing with this? Okay, so this is a quite challenging question. It's a complex question. And of course, I don't have a crystal ball. I think, I think some businesses are more dependent on Chinese products than others. So I think it's very difficult to generalize across all industries and all segments. I mean, we see, it also depends, are you in a what is called a critical industry right now? We work with some family businesses that have been earmarked as critical and essential industry in the crisis. So many of them, they continue operating like normal, oftentimes quite the contrary. They have to accelerate. And then the question is just how do they adjust shifts to keep employees safe? But then, of course, you have other types of firms that have literally been shut down. And I mean, logistics, the global supply chains are surprisingly functioning, but of course, there are massive delays in many industries and segments, and the global logistics are challenged. And so from that point of view, I don't have a crystal ball. I think my assumption is that many firms will, in this moment, rethink their supply chain, rethink how they interact with customers and suppliers, and again, think about resilience. How can they maybe build up redundancy systems in the way they organize themselves in the ecosystem in order to weather another storm like this in the future? I think that a lot of companies will see this as a wake-up call and then build in resiliency into the system. That is a little bit how I see it. And to the second question of you, how are family businesses dealing with this? Again, we see both. And it heavily depends on what's the attitude of the family, what's the attitude of the ownership group. If the ownership group, and also how united is the family. If the family and the ownership group are very close and they can take effective decisions in a very quick way, then a lot of things happen in a very agile manner. But what we do see surface in this situation now is if there are fragmentations in the family, this spills over to the business very quickly. So let me quickly go to the second point, Janeth. So please don't forget to upvote if you like a question. Janeth Fonseca, is it a good idea to invest in export-import in this crisis situation? Again, difficult for me to address because I think it is very much dependent on the market and industries you're in, and specifically the geographic situation. I think, again, like in every industry, there will be massive opportunities, but also major challenges. And I think logistics is a tough industry to be in, of course. And but again, I think there are massive opportunities right now, given that movement of goods seems to be free, while movement of humans is pretty restricted. So I assume that anything having to do with getting products from A to B is probably not a bad thing to be in. Okay, so I'll come back to more questions later. Let me just quickly go back into the presentation. We'll have time for some more questions towards the end. So we went through these kind of 6 elements of resilience and adaptation. But what we believe, what we think is that basically what got you here will not take you there. So when we look at these family firms that have survived over 150, 200, 300 years, these dimensions of resilience and adaptation might no longer be enough in the world where, anyway, we're in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. We have exponential technologies come in. We are globally connected. Our competition comes in globally. So the world is in itself already changing quite aggressively now. And on top of that, we have the crisis. And I think the crisis is more of a precursor to actually showcase which companies are digitally ready and which companies are not, and which companies are resilient and adaptable and which ones are not. I think it's not so much that the crisis itself will show that, will have the effect on the company. I think it's literally the crisis will just surface deficiencies in the organization from a governance point of view. And reactivity, which in many family firms has been a mantra, being more conservative, is just not an option anymore. So here are another quick questions I want to ask you that you can please address in the chat. So beyond those 6 dimensions I shared and what you shared before around resilience and adaptation, in order to survive the current crisis, what are some of the things you need to do or should be doing in addition to those 6 strategies? So what are the things you should do in addition? So please use the chat function again. Susan, co-leadership and co-creation, yes. Digital agility, yes. Digital agility. Transform, the route to market, yes. So a lot of transformation on the market side, on the business model side. Think beyond industry boundaries, yes, absolutely. So think more holistically, and also in ecosystems. Social innovation, digital ecosystems, diversification, link to startups, absolutely. So how can we interact more with the startup ecosystem? Listen to others, so in particular to your customers. Better governance, wonderful, great points here. Empathy, absolutely, towards many people, towards your family, towards your employees, towards your customers. Wonderful. Communication, yes. Fantastic. Foreseeing the future. Yes, that's a good one. I think everybody would sign up for that one. Okay, let me get back to the slides, and of course we'll pick up all your points afterwards. So I'll bring back this framework with the 5 stones. So like many of you wrote, it needs a systemic approach, a holistic approach. Long-termism, yes, but holistic and integrative, taking into account the interests and needs and desires of all the different stakeholders. Of course, the individuals, the family, but also in the business, your employees, your customers, your suppliers, and also greater society. So really taking this ecosystem approach and thinking it through very holistically. Second point, clear and decisive actions need to be taken on the family side, the business side, and the ownership side. And communication. You mentioned it as well in the comments. Communicate. You cannot communicate enough in this moment in time. And again, here we see in our work with families, we see some that are doing a world-class job. They communicate in real time with their employees, but also with their family members who are not in the business. What's going on every day, every week, kind of taking into account the situation. And others that are missing out on that opportunity, and I feel like that will backfire. If you don't communicate in real time now, then your employees might lose trust in you, or also your suppliers and customers. So real-time communication is essential. And very important, thinking, of course, about short-term elements and things that need to happen, but also long-term consequences. So risk mapping. What are the imminent risks on the family, the business, and the ownership level? But also opportunities. Again, don't only think about it from a risk side, think it through also from an opportunity side, because every crisis is an opportunity, and the entrepreneurs amongst you will appreciate that right now is an amazing opportunity from a business point of view if you do things now and do them in an unconventional entrepreneurial way. So when we think about, and many of you will know this framework, the three-circle model, which is kind of the legacy framework in the family business field, there are specific actions that can happen or should happen on each of the three circles. So let's start on the family side. So as a family, as a business owning family now, of course, paramount is health. You want to make sure that each individual in the family, if they're active in the business or not, you want to make sure that everybody's safe and healthy. And you want to think about what does that mean, and social distancing, how do we want to handle the situation? We have our weekly family meeting, we have our family council meeting, we have our family assembly, we have family days. How do we handle that? You want to make sure that you manage the stress and the anxiety of certain family members in this situation. Everybody will respond differently and does respond differently to this. Some are more relaxed, rightly or not, and others are less, rightly or not. You need to have empathy for individual life situations and that everybody will respond to this differently. Do you have small children or not? So everything is different. Do you have pre-existing health conditions or not? What is also important is ensure to take everybody along on the journey, whatever the journey is you are on. For example, if you, as a business and the ownership group, if you decide to forego dividend payments for a certain number of years to protect the business, how will this affect family members who are maybe not in the business, who don't have an income from the business, who are passively or indirectly dependent on dividend payments? How do you make sure that they are convinced and bought into this plan, right? So make sure that everybody is part of this journey. Push out any face-to-face meeting that you might have. And we've seen a lot of families push out their family meetings, family assemblies already quite proactively. And of course, move online. Leverage the online capabilities you have, like the webinars, and take advantage of the next generation, the digital natives who are very tech savvy and who can help you set up these kind of tech systems to exchange and continue interacting. And also, very importantly, as the owning family or as the ownership group or the family behind it, step up and show face in the business. Show your employees that you're there, that you care about the organization. As an ownership group, there are a few other things you want to think about. What we see is that owners, and some owners are more detached from the business, others are very hands-on. But on average, we see that owners are moving more center stage. They're actually rolling up their sleeves and really getting into the activities of the business, thinking it through together with the board or the management team. Signal, as an ownership group, you need to signal to all your stakeholders, the employees, their families, your customers, your suppliers, that you are in it for the long run. You are really there. You're not considering necessarily now selling the business, etc. Whatever your strategy might be, you're in it for the long run. You want to protect your employees. You want to protect the business and the interactions with the customers. From a financial point of view, you should consider capital injections, of course, from family capital, vis-a-vis taking up credits from the outside. Of course, there are a lot of credit schemes right now that governments are pushing out. You can, of course, think about that. However, now, depending on the country, linked to those credits, oftentimes they already, and many will say, rightly so, will say you will have to forego dividend payments if you take up debt capital or credits from the state parachute systems. Then the alternative is injecting the money from the family holding, for example, and then you might be more secured. And also consider investment opportunities. I think, again, like I said, there are tremendous investment opportunities right now out there on the market. I think we will see a lot of M&A activities coming up in the next couple of months. Unfortunately, many companies will not survive this crisis. Many SMEs that are family run and led will not manage to survive this crisis. Also non-family business, of course. But for families that are, and we do see on average that families are more cash-rich family businesses than non-family businesses because of the financial prudence, this triggers a lot of opportunities from an acquisition point of view. And lastly, on the business side, we need committed leadership. Again, on the family side and not non-family side. Some of you mentioned governance. Absolutely. This is the moment in time where family firms with world-class governance, with world-class boards and family governance and ownership governance, they will shine in this crisis. And those who are struggling definitely need to leverage this crisis as an opportunity to put this governance in place. Cash preservation, as I think probably the word of the year for businesses. How can we preserve cash? That is on everybody's agenda right now, family firm or not. We talked about communication, real-time, honest, thinking about employee retention plans. And again, here we see that family firms are probably a bit better at thinking about retention of their loyal employees than non-family firms. Ecosystem thinking, you mentioned that, working closely with suppliers and customers in the ecosystem. Reducing the complexity, it's an opportunity to really think through what are the things we need and what can we get rid of. Kind of in the Toyota language, the muda, getting rid of the muda in the system. And identify business opportunities. 2-3 more slides, and then we'll go into the Q&A for the last 10-15 minutes. So what we see is we need to have family and owners, the board and the top management team, we need them to move closer together. We need them to interact in real time. We need the family, the ownership group, and the business to really interact and collaborate in order to go through this crisis. And owners and family members need to get closer to the business and to the board. We see, and we see some families and businesses have done this really, really well. They've put together in real time, cross-functional, agile task forces to kind of go through this crisis. And if this is kind of a heterogeneous task force with family, with owners, with business, with board members, then this is very, very efficient. Now we talked about communication and thinking about risks and opportunities. Here, another quick poll. Just, I would be curious because we have about 50 to 60% family businesses in the room, and then so about half family business, non-family business. And I would be curious to see how you feel about how your business will do post-crisis. Do you think that your business will come out of this stronger? So will you turn this into an opportunity? Will you accelerate post-crisis and run a more successful organization afterwards? Or do you think it will kind of just continue as it is? Or do you think, no, it will go terribly wrong, our business will really, really suffer from this crisis, and if we recover, it will take a lot of time? Here is what we see. We see that family businesses, now from this sample, seem to be more optimistic when it comes to their situation post-crisis. And that's interesting. It's not surprising. I think it confirms kind of what we've been discussing, but it's very interesting. It says 34% of those of the overall respondents in the group have a very optimistic view. So that's 34% of the total. So that's actually 60% of the family businesses, because about 50% are family. So that's very nice to see. Also quite good optimism on the non-family business side, but a little bit less. So wonderful. Thanks a lot. This is exciting. Let me go back to the slides and then just to kind of conclude, and then we'll still have 10 minutes for Q&A. So in conclusion, COVID-19 isn't the last crisis that you and your businesses will see. I think that is clear. There are different types of crises that exist. However, it is one that is in some form or shape stressing us as humanity disproportionately in some way. Some economists have said that the issue about this crisis is the sudden standstill of supply and demand simultaneously. So it's different from a financial crisis where certain sectors have been hit, or maybe if there has been a war that affects a certain geographical region. But literally now the entire world is just coming to a standstill, or has come to a standstill, starting to slowly open up again. I mean, China is getting strong and active again. Here in Switzerland, as of today, we see some activities again as well. Our neighboring countries, Austria, Germany as well, Italy as well. I think what is essential is that you really try, after this crisis, when it's over, and I hope it's over very soon, take time to reflect on the family side, the ownership side, the business side, and try to learn what have we done right, what have we done wrong, or what could we have done better? Because there will be another crisis, and those who are crisis resilient are the ones who have good governance, effective and efficient real-time decision-making and communication. So learn from it and get out of it stronger. And in a nutshell, again, these are some of the parameters that we've been discussing. Good governance, family business ownership, strong leadership, long-term thinking, financial prudence, diversification of assets is essential, risk management, strategy, entrepreneurialism, emotional connection, loyalty of employees, and the bigger pictures, the social and environmental responsibility are, in a nutshell, some of the core elements that we see. And with that, I would like to go back to the Q&A, and we have time for a few more questions. So if you haven't asked questions yet, please ask them now. And if you haven't liked any questions yet, like them now. So the questions that are most interesting for most of you surface to the top. So I have a question here from Sarah. You mentioned that family businesses have shown resilience in time of crisis. We know now that we are experiencing more crises at an accelerated pace than before. How would the adaptation mechanism you propose need to be different, given that what worked back then may not work so well for families operating in today's context? Absolutely. I think maybe that question you asked before we moved into the second part of the webinar, I hope that some of the things we discussed towards the end of the webinar now have responded to that. But you're absolutely right. The world has accelerated. We are globally connected. And again, these kind of 6 elements that I talked about in the beginning are not enough anymore. And kind of responding to a crisis and just observing what's happening is not enough anymore. You need to be more agile. It needs to be more real time. So I hope that the last points I brought up addressed those points. Then we have a question from Derek here. There seems to be a global collaborative process emerging, combining public, private, academic actors to address quickly the scientific dimension. Yes, post-crisis, you see the emergence of new types of public-private partnerships, platforms to address dynamically health, climate, other risks, where family-owned companies could play. Oh yeah, wonderful question, Derek. This is amazing. Yes, absolutely. I think this public-private partnership element, I mean, we see that across the board globally has really been promoted and has been essential. I mean, sometimes politicians asking, in other cases, politicians demanding companies to step in. In other cases, business asking to help, they volunteering to help, like the examples I shared. I think on average we will see, and you're right. I mean, there are many problems in the world that are too big for one type of stakeholder to address them alone. So we need interdependency. We need public-private partnerships. We see that in the philanthropy space actually quite a lot, that the interaction between different types of stakeholders, government players, business leaders, academic leaders, individuals and philanthropists, that together they can actually resolve some of the big challenges. So I love that question, and I fully endorse the point you made. Fernando is the next question that surfaced to the top. After this crisis, what are the main 3 key changes that will not go back to normal after the crisis? In other words, what are the permanent changes for life? Oof, that's an interesting one. Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but if I think about it, I mean, there've been, and you probably saw that on social media, there have been a lot of kind of discussions around digitalization, and of course, I mean, the internet was put in place quite some time ago now, 30 years almost, and digital transformation is something we've been discussing collectively for 1 or 2 decades now, fourth industrial revolution. However, somehow companies have struggled to really push it through on average. Some have been world-class, others are really struggling and have struggled. I think now you just don't have an option anymore. Now you need to actually drive forward this transformation if you like it or not. So I think one of the big fundamental changes we are going to see after this crisis is that actually human beings will up their digital literacy. I also think the education system, by the way, and I have small kids in the education system, and I must say very personally, I was shocked by how unprepared the education system here was in one of the most innovative countries in the world. I was honestly shocked to see the level of involvement and the level of agile adaptation, how to educate children in this new world. So I genuinely hope that globally the education system will look very different. Not to say that kids should all be in front of their iPad 24/7, but that we embrace the opportunities that this brings with it. First. Second, I think companies will embrace it. I think as a result, home office systems, etc., will be more acceptable on a broad scale. So that's another hope I have. So those are the big things, and as a result, maybe I think humanity will maybe be a bit more mindful towards the planet. I think our travel schemes will look very different. I think we will think more locally again. I spoke to some colleagues and they said it's so interesting, now that we're shut down, we walk around our neighborhood and we start talking to people who we actually never really realized live next door. So I think we will kind of come back to our roots and to a more local approach, while of course, hopefully the borders opening up very soon again, because of course, there are also certain nationalist tendencies that we see surfacing right now, which also let me worry in some way. But I think this localization element can also be a positive thing. I'll take one last question and then we have to close because we're 3 minutes before 12. Sabine, navigating one crisis is one thing, navigating several is another. How can a family business divide roles to overcome COVID-19 along with a financial economic crisis in its domestic market? Tackling several issues in parallel is a challenge. I fully agree. I think that now we have an overlay of multiple things. Already we have the digitalization crisis, which has already hit. If you think about you're in retail, and you have not digitized your e-commerce side, the customer-facing side of your business, that already was struggling with giants like Amazon, of course, overrolling entire markets. If you're a small retail family business and you have not pushed your digital agenda, that itself was already tough. In times of COVID, where nobody is allowed to move out and the shops have to close, I mean, this is a complete nightmare for small family businesses that are not world-class in e-commerce. So, and then you add the financial thing. If on top of that, if you think about some markets, take Venezuela, take other economies, now Turkey and other markets, I think this will become even more challenging. So, and how you can divide roles, I think maybe within the board, within the councils you have, maybe you put together different task forces to say, okay, we have a COVID task force, we have a digitalization task force. So you need to have more specific agile and nimble task forces within your governance bodies. Okay, so with that, I would like to close. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. Thank you so much for engaging in the conversation, for all the great questions and comments and interactions. The webinar will be shared on the website shortly after, where you can also relive the webinar. You can share it with your friends and family members. Please stay in touch. You see my email address here. We have the Family Business Center website. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have additional questions. Don't shy away. Just reach out. Let's connect. Let's stay in touch. And with that, I hope you all have a great afternoon in Europe and a great evening and night in Asia. Not sure how many are there from the Americas. If so, have a great day. And wonderful to be in touch. And hope to see you all soon. And stay safe and healthy. Take good care. Thank you.